I hope you're able to get your tea, coffee, and something sweet. And I know you're making new connections and lots of conversations. And definitely, our first session sparked an awful lot of interest. And for some people, I suppose, from those I talked to in the break, it was, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming. And then for others, it's, baby steps, little steps at a time. And definitely everyone is learning from each other. So on to our next session, and this is operational efficiencies. So I'd like to welcome to the panel, Megan Best is coming back up again. Megan, thank you. Before you bring your water with you. Joining Megan is Jeff Scott from Sunbelt Rentals. Jeff is the Regional Business Development Manager, Power, Events and Clean Energy at Sunbelt Rentals. It's an industry leader in the supply of machinery, temporary power solutions and site infrastructure to the event industry. And Jeff has 38 years experience in the equipment rental industry, 24 of those in power and events. So that's Jeff Scott from Sunbelt Rentals. And then we have Ross Parkhill. Thanks, Ross, if you'd like to join us. Ross is the founder and director of Stendhal Festival. As you know, it's our leading summer music and arts camping festival and the largest independent camping festival on the island of Ireland. It happens at Ballymully Cottage Farm in Limavady and has 10,000 festival goers last year. A lot of people, 85% of the performers were Indigenous artists. And finally, we have Jacqueline Whoriskey. Jacqueline, if you'd like to join us, who's the events manager at Derry City and Strabane Council. Now, Jacqueline has managed so many events, including the Foyle Maritime Festival in 2022. And in particular, it's interesting to note that it raised awareness of key environmental issues and commissioned a sculpture called Turn Off the Plastic Tap to highlight the use of single-use plastic. So thank you, everybody, for being here and having a discussion. We're going to take it over up until the next 40 minutes anyway. Megan, if I can turn to you first. Operational efficiencies. So when that comes to events, what does that actually mean?
Well, I'm sure any event organizer here would be able to answer that one. Operational efficiency is key to organizing an event, really. I suppose if we were to look at it from the point of view of, from point of view of waste as well, but from the point of view of power, one of the things that we would be striving towards in terms of operational efficiency is really detailed planning and advancing for an event. And I'm going to fall back on my years of organising large-scale outdoor music festivals, really understanding who's going to be at the event, what they're going to be plugging in, when they're going to be plugging it in order to be able to design the generator load. And you'll be able to speak to this far more than I will, Jeff, but in order to be able to design that so that it responds to the needs of the event instead of being over-spec'd is a massive, massive operational efficiency to aim for. One of the things that we discovered over the years is that generators are often far too big for what they need to be. And a lot of times this is down to stage managers and technical because they live in that fear of having a cutout. But a generator that's not operating at its efficiency can be burning fuel entirely unnecessarily. A generator should be burning at about 70%. Sometimes they're burning at like 10, 15, 20% on some of the ones that we've monitored. And this just means a huge amount of inefficiency in fuel use and a huge amount of wastage and a huge amount of unnecessary carbon emissions.
Jeff, where are we in Northern Ireland in regard to greener temporary power supplies?
The three main things that we can offer from our industry for this is stage 5 generators, which will come to HVO and battery storage units. So stage 5 generators are basically the next generation in engine design, and while they're not just zero emissions, but they are very, very close to zero emissions. They operate through. The reason that they're doing that is because they have a chemical, we all know it, called AdBlue. Most of us put it in our cars, and that turns the bad stuff basically into water vapor, and that sends it out through the exhaust. So stage 5, if you have a stage 5 generator, you're a bit of the way there to being greener. It's not the full solution, but you're a bit of the way there. The downside, if you want to call it that, to the stage 5 generator is from a rental point of view is the cost of it. It's several years ago, you had 100 kVA, for the sake of argument, would have cost £20,000. A stage 500 kVA is somewhere between 35 and 40 now. So that cost, from our point of view, has to be passed on to the end user, to the person that's hiring it. So it's ticking the green box, but it's costing more money. It's costing more money to maintain. It's costing more money to buy. It's costing the end user more money to rent. And it is a wee bit more technical, so it needs a wee bit more on-site management. The like of that blue tank will need checked. They don't like light load. If there's, if, as Megan said, if they're on light load, they don't like that. So the job has to be spec'd correctly. And as we all know in events, you can spec a job, and within 2 or 3 minutes, it's spec'd wrong because somebody turns up that wasn't meant to turn up, or they turn up with a different socket that they were already asked for. So that's the first thing, is the stage 5 stuff.
How can you help events? What information can you give to event organisers that helps them in regard to their fuel consumption reduction, or managing and getting the spec right?
The main thing is early engagement and planning. Get in there early. Use a council, for example. We all know when the events are coming up. It's not a reactive event. Very few events are reactive. They're planned. So right away, then you're into site visits, and also you're speaking to the end user. That's a lot of the time I would deal with councils, and I would say, give me your list of caterers, give me your sound guys. And as you go through your career, you get to know these people, and they all turn up at the same events, so you kind of know. To get to the point where you're saying to some of the caterers, are you bringing such and such a van or such and such a van, and you spec it as best you can. Throughout the years, as Megan says, it has been spec'd high. We think we need a 50 kVA, stick 100 in. Yeah. That's where the stage 5 might struggle a little bit. So the planning, early engagement, site visits, and basically speaking to everyone involved in the event, becoming part of the team, becoming a subcontractor almost, rather than just, do you want a generator?
And in regard to site visits, the layout, how important is that if you have that festival, and the layout and being energy efficient in that way, and the utilisation of generators? Again,
if it's planned correctly, for example, there's a lot of events where, say, there's a roadway, so you have a generator on this side of the road, generator on this side of the road, when really one generator will do it, and you can go up and over with the cable or go across with cable ramp. So you're cutting down on the many generators is running for a start. Getting all the caterers in the one place, like a food village, if you like, so that all the generators are in the one place, and sharing generators. Again, it has to be spec'd correctly. Share the generators, 3 or 4 caterers off the one machine. Possibly have a standby or a backup sitting somewhere that you can tow in position just as a plan B. So the site layout can definitely. There's too much to think of. If it's a repeat event, to go, well, okay, it's on again in 2024. Well, what did we do last year? Just put that order in again, or what did we do the year before that? There's no, how do we, I'm not saying there's no, but we need a bit more planning of how do we plan this, pretending it's a fresh event, that sort of way.
From your experience running the festival, what difficulties have you had, and what solutions have you been bringing to the party?
As far as power goes, I think we would work with Sunbelt. In 2019, we had 22 large generators on site. We got that down by centralising and shifting things around to 18, which is still a long way to go. And we've also started monitoring what usage each generator is doing, which we didn't do previously. So I suppose the layout, as you say, cable ramp up and over, just that, I suppose, and having a conversation this year about potential battery trial on a stage. So.
And trying to be efficient, operational efficiencies, as we were talking about in regard to the festival. How important have the alliances that you have developed with the likes of Derry and Strabane District Council and other organisations around you, how has that benefited you?
Massively. I mean, 2018, I think it was, Zero Waste Northwest, I'm sure many will be familiar with. We started the separation zero waste stations, which was phenomenal, and a real game changer as far as waste management was concerned. That we've kept going, but as people were talking about earlier, there's a serious human resource behind doing that and having people there to say segregate your waste here or there. And as Pamela says, it is all getting sorted out. There is that doubt, as others said, so there's definitely an educational piece that could maybe be done around that. as far as single-use plastics, last year we collaborated with Jackie after the Edinburgh learning trip. So we're now using Derry and Strabane single-use plastic cups. But even looking at that, we've recently done like a plastic and packaging audit. So we're looking at the minute, how can we completely get away from plastic? Just, I suppose it is in our blood. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Megan, your pie chart earlier, and it had about people travelling to the festival, and some of us, we were quite surprised at the waste in those, had a smaller chunk of that pie chart. The festival here and many others in Northern Ireland and across Ireland are rural, they're in isolated areas, and we need cars and we need buses to get there. We'll never overcome that, surely.
It's a tricky one, all right, yeah. Yeah, we are very reliant on the private car here in this country, yeah. One of the things that we've been working towards with the festivals that we work with is really understanding how audiences are traveling. So doing those kind of audience surveys, doing the engagement, taking drone photos and counting how many cars are in the car park, and using that information to work with county councils on their sustainable mobility plan. One of the pieces that I was chatting to one of the festivals with just last week actually on this particular topic was one of the festivals in Galway, which has a reputation for being a gridlocked city, and around the time of the festival it gets even worse. They were making the point that during the time of the festival, their programme finishes after the last train back to Dublin. So people are forced to drive. And they're like, where is the joined up thinking at the top? Is there a conversation that we can have with the NTA, the National Transport Authority, around putting on some extra trains while the festival is running? It's a large capacity festival. So there's gathering the data, understanding how people are travelling and why they're travelling, and then using that data to have those kind of higher level conversations with the county councils, with the national agencies, so that we can start to push for that change. But I suppose it's engaging the audiences and as I was saying earlier, pushing the opportunities and the alternatives that are there, and then seeing what can happen with the programme and with your understanding of your event to try and push for the larger scale changes, I guess.
Jacqueline, you had the Foyle Maritime Festival, very, very successful, tens of thousands of people. There's a prime time to educate, as Megan was saying, your stakeholders, all the visitors, everyone. What did you take from that in regard to being your sustainability journey and how you were able to convince people that were coming to the festival?
Yeah. Well, as we've all said, it is still a journey. We're definitely not there yet, but we found our audiences were very proactive in terms of, we did the Wendy scenario. She did it with much more pizzazz. In terms of our stations, our eco stations, people were looking for it. What I guess, we know that the audience is there, they have the right mindset. It's just making sure that the tools are there for them to be able to do it. And that was one of the things really we want to enforce this year. And I think it was Wendy said about making sure sustainability is on the agenda at every meeting. We also have gone that one step further, where we have sustainability group, especially for the Foyle Maritime Festival, where all we talk about is sustainability. And again, I guess we have the luxury of being with the council, that we can try and influence the other sections within council, whether it be the environment section, and we manned our bins with our bin men. And again, it was about trying to change that mindset from their perspective, so they could see, if we don't make this effort at source, then it'll cost us more and everything. Now, we're still on that journey. We're definitely not there yet, but we use the Maritime Festival to try and change the mindsets of not just our audience, but also our own employees, our staff, our partners, and they really use that as a platform to create awareness.
So not just something like the reusable cup, but how do you deal with transport? You are in a city and the environment of a city, right? So people can get to you more readily, but are there extra measures, extra public transport measures that you engage so that people from outside the city can utilise those and go into the Foyle to see something like the Maritime Festival?
Yes, so we have, we meet with TransLink once every quarter, and we share stats from our events and share, key times and things like that, where they can, they will increase the public transport where it works. We know one of our biggest changes we have to make is how people get to our event, even in a city the size that we have. For TransLink, it was really, really talking to them and making them aware of what was coming up, because very often they aren't aware. They're just not across the detail as to what we know, and we don't just share our event information, we share what our grant aid information, the events that we grant aid as well. So it was really just getting them to think and plan ahead and put on extra trains if it's Halloween, for example, put on extra buses if it's the Foyle Maritime Festival. It works sometimes it doesn't work, and then we learn from the next time. So they're key to the event. I think 2 Foyle Maritime Festivals ago, I'm ashamed to say it, but 90% of the people that came to our event came by private car. We are striving to bring that down to at least 50% and beyond.
Ross, how do you deal with transport getting to you're sort of remote, aren't you?
We're pretty rural, yeah. Honest answer is it's something we haven't really looked at in the past, I'm ashamed to say, but it is something we're looking at this year. Running shuttle buses from Ballerina train station, which is our closest, Strabane through to Derry with different pickups, Belfast, Portrush, Cookstown. So it's something we've always been conscious of, but we haven't had the resource or capacity or enough focus really.
But the cost that you could pass on to your festival goer, because they won't be driving, but rather than you to absorb those costs, to pass those on?
I think it would be a happy medium. Is there somebody here from TransLink that I can chat to then? TransLink should certainly be at this type of event. I'm sure they were invited, but that's conversations we need to have. And if I have to go to private coach companies, then we'll just have to figure it out. But we're working on that at the moment.
Have we got the microphone? It's just the lady who asked the question about power earlier, and I stopped you in your tracks. I apologise for that then. If you'd like to maybe put that into the panel now, thanks.
Okay, I don't want to repeat everything.
No, that's okay. Go for it.
But really, my question is, I'm starting to get very interested in battery-powered generators. And I've asked other sort of colleagues around the industry, and nobody seems to be using them, and I sort of have a nervousness about the reliability of them. And again, only looking at this stage, looking for small power draws. So, for example, last year for our larger festival, the Georgian Festival, we started to charge stall holders for power. And once we started to do this, it was amazing how many people didn't need power, that previously had needed power for things like plugging in their mobile phone chargers and so on. So we were finding that in streets where we'd maybe needed, 100 kVA generator, we were down to needing a 45 kVA generator for powering lights. And I'm not an electrician, I'm not very technical, but we do have accurate figures on what our requirements are. And just from a bit of online research, I'd looked and thought that quite small battery-powered generators would maybe be sufficient for this. But I'm finding it very hard to find anywhere locally to get advice on where you could purchase them, hire them. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are.
Jeff, do you want to take that?
You can hire them from Sunbelt.
In regard to their efficiency as well as
other hire companies are available. They're very I think it's important to remember that a battery, they're called battery storage units, or BSUs as we call them, and they are a standalone piece of kit. They're not a replacement for a generator. They work in conjunction with the generator. And basically what that means is the smaller ones, you can get small ones, literally like a briefcase type one, but you're only really getting like a 13 amp supply off that. That's something that's going to run like a PA system on the back of a float or something like that there. But when you're into, say, stall holders or stages, they will run in conjunction with the generator. So during an event when everything's going, when you've got caterers going, you've got stage going, you've got security going, comms going, the generator pretty much runs the event. It's only when you get to light loads, say if a generator has to run overnight for the sake of argument to run fridges or whatever, as you say, you're running a 100 kVA generator, you're burning 12 litres an hour in fuel throughout the night, putting all this carbon and bad stuff into the environment, whereas when the battery box is with the generator takes over the light load. So the generator's not running, you're saving fuel, you're saving money. If it's in a residential area, then there's no sound, so you have no complaints from the locals. Again, as far as efficiencies goes and reliability, again, it's down to speccing the job correctly. If it's all load dependent, a battery will do what it says what it'll do. You can have it in two formats. You can have it on a timer. You can have it just manually timing it, come on at that time, come off at that time. Or the best way to do it is a full hybrid mode where the two machines talk to each other effectively. And when the load's big, the generator runs it. When the load's small, the battery takes over. While the generator's running, it's charging the battery. The battery, if it does get down to say 20%, it then sends a message back to the generator to take up the load. It takes up the load and charges the battery at the same time. So it's very intelligent, but it needs to be a bit of setting up, and again, it needs to be spec'd correctly. You know, we've had instances where people think a battery storage unit is a replacement for a generator, and they're just trying to put the full load on it, and very quickly the battery just goes straight to 20%. Generator kicks in, and the complaint is, well, that doesn't really work. It doesn't work because it's not being used correctly. You know, it has to be used in the correct application, and that all comes down to spec and stuff. Correctly.
And in terms of cost, is it a lot more costly to run that way? Yes.
Bit of a cop-out on this one. Battery storage units are what we call price on application. If I can save a customer £1,000 a week in fuel, then the price of his battery box is going to be wherever. But it's really price on application. It depends on the job. It depends on the running hours of the generator, how long the generator is going to be running. Typically, the most standard battery box in the market at the minute is called a 4590, which is a 45 kVA. And depending on the application, you're looking at anywhere between £300 and £500 a week, which sounds a lot, but you can save that within a couple of days in fuel. You know, the price of white diesel today before VAT's £1.20. You know, if we do the sums, a generator running at 12 hours a litre, you know, overnight you're spending hundreds of pounds to run a few fridges or whatever. So it's always worked out to make it work for everybody, if you like.
It's all part of the planning. Megan, one thing I've been told that was learned from the gathering in Scotland was the requirement for any publicly funded organisation to have a baseline of impact. And so therefore people have their baseline and they can know where they're going to next. What's your experience of that and the necessity for that?
That's a great question. I suppose understanding where you're at and doing an audit and getting the carbon footprint and getting that kind of baseline is a really key piece as an events organizer, because it does highlight where the hotspots are and where you're going to have the biggest impact as an event. The problem, I guess, is for festival organisers and event organisers is that if you do that process year on year, you get better at it and you actually start capturing more of the carbon emissions data than you were the first time around. Like even the one that I was showing earlier on didn't actually incorporate catering. There's a huge amount of carbon emissions associated with food that wasn't captured in that particular instance. So, and I suppose the other thing is there's the scope 3 emissions that are associated with materials used on an event. Again, that's a big piece in the kind of waste conversation and the questions that you were asking as well, because the processing of waste out an event, although it might have a small enough carbon impact, the embedded carbon that is in the materials that are used at an event, or even the embedded carbon that is created in the manufacture of single-use things. The cups is a perfect example, and there's a calculation sheet coming in that single-use plastics guide that we're publishing, is massive. Massive. So the scope 3 is really difficult to ascertain and to get your hands on. Audience travel is another scope 3. It's really tricky. So in terms of establishing a baseline, I would say that it probably takes a few years to get good enough at carbon accounting to get to the baseline. But it's a really important thing to start embedding from the outset. And it comes back to that kind of detailed planning, that advancing, that stakeholder engagement, that event organisers are really, really, really good at. It's like, we're going to start this year. We're going to try and capture this information. Will you work on it with us? Will you tell us how you travel to and from the event? Even your core team of suppliers, so that we can start getting an understanding of where our impacts are, and then we can start developing out on that once we start developing those skills.
We're going to open it up to the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, hands up. Anyone who would like to put a question at the front here? Wendy's going to ask and start the ball rolling.
I'm actually not going to ask a question. I'm just going to say, regarding the transport side of things, we've been running free buses to our events for about the past 6 years, and it's really, really popular. And just if anybody wants to talk to us about the nuts and bolts and difficulties we found, last year there was too many people for our buses and everybody wanted to go home at the same time, to the point where we're now going to charge a nominal fee. But just if it's helpful for anybody, we do have some knowledge we can share on that.
Thank you. Anyone from the floor? Any questions in regard to running your event? Siobhan?
Thank you. I'm Siobhan McGuigan from Tourism Northern Ireland. I have a question about performers' travel and what challenges that faces. I remember from having chatted to Celtic Connections, that they were saying that they had a challenge because a lot of their performers come from the States and, well, they can't really walk. You could ask them to swim, I suppose, but it might not go down too well. But it was how they, I suppose, maintain that level of performer and what the audience expects, but also balance it, with the sort of sustainable agenda. And I do know they were talking to Belfast Trad Fest about could they be clever and work together about if Celtic Connections were scheduling somebody, could they then go to Belfast Trad Fest and so on. But I just wanted, particularly probably Ross and Jacqueline, maybe about performers, what challenges does that face to yourself?
Like Ross, I said, so many of your artists are Indigenous and they wouldn't travel as far. So on her point there, do you deliberately not take in too many international artists?
No, well, yes and no. I suppose the ethos of the festival is Indigenous artists and that there's a platform there for them, and we use bigger artists, I suppose, to give them broader, bigger audiences and a bigger platform. We, again, ashamed to say, artist travel from an international perspective isn't something that, whilst we've done a session on it in Edinburgh, it's not something we are consciously benchmarking or but something, obviously when there's more literature now that I'm aware of, we're ever more conscious of it. At the same time, we've been a national event, for example, in Tourism NI's funding programs, and we're now looking to become an international event, so we want to attract more international artists. So it is quite timely, I suppose, to be more conscious of it, but it's currently not something that we've really thought too much about.
So Jacqueline, in regard to the council, we all love to see the big international stars coming here, but we also love to see the local Indigenous ones. So how do you get that balance and, as Siobhan was saying, that sustainability journey?
Yeah. I suppose the best example we would have would be our City of Derry Jazz and Big Band Festival, that I think we have about 300 performers that come in. A lot of them are local, but a lot of them are not from here. So we started a number of years ago, probably more costs, I have to say, than sustainability, but encouraging them to travel together was the priority, because we just couldn't afford to fly them all in or have them all come separately. And and we also then put them all we made them share bedroom, not different bands share bedrooms. They were coming and they all wanted their own bedroom. We were going, no, we can't. We just need just to think sustainably and costly. From the outset. Now, we've been doing that a number of years, so we think we've the right balance, and now in terms of the international travel, how they get here, where bands can, like some bands have big vans, big trucks, they can share travel. So we have an officer and she knows exactly where somebody is and exactly the time they're meant to be there, and she really does work it out for them, probably to save money as much as it is to be sustainable. So that's probably our best example of getting that balance right. But we need the mix. We can't not have international artists, and we can't not have encourage our locals as well.
What resistance have you got to that?
Oh, there was uproar whenever we asked them to share bedrooms. It wasn't good. Some didn't come, but they lost out because but they've come back since and they've accepted it. We used to give them taxis we stopped all of that. We had to, from a public purse perspective. We really, really had to, but it made sense to do so. That was interesting. And you always meet resistance a bit. I think you said yourself, Megan, earlier on, this is the way we used to do it. It doesn't matter anymore. It has to change. So we saw it through, and thankfully, we're seeing the rewards of that now.
There's an old phrase, lead, follow, or get out of the way,
Yeah.
comes to mind. Anybody else from the floor? Question in the middle there, thank you.
Hi, Pete from the ICC Belfast Waterfront Hall and Ulster Hall. That title is always a mouthful. Just touching on Siobhan's question there. So we've seen massive touring operations such as Coldplay taking a very sustainable mindset and a very accessible mindset across the board. Not all artists have the capability of doing that, and that's the cold and hard fact. Mid-level touring, for example, is dying out. So mid-level artists aren't touring anymore. We recently attended a conference where artists were talking about coming back from tour with 10, 15 grand losses and things like that for smaller acts. So I suppose from our perspective as a venue, how do we influence artists and promoters, and how do we support those tours that are coming at a loss and are probably choosing the cheapest option rather than the most sustainable option?
Who wants to take that? Jacqueline?
Sorry, that was a big question.
No.
You had a big hook and you just drag them in. It's tough.
The last bit of the question, sorry, just say that bit again.
So with artists choosing the cheapest option probably over the most sustainable option, how do we influence promoters and artists as a venue to make sure that, how do we support them?
Yeah, so we have a hotelier group in the city in Derry, and we regularly communicate with them. We did so very, very recently where we said that their hotel prices were just too expensive for artists and for booking from the creative perspective. Whatever you want to charge for your visitor, grand, but for artists. So they actually helped reduce the cost of hotel rooms for us because we went with the lobby. We didn't go by ourselves. We went as a collective. There's a co-design group in Derry of creative people, and we basically said, this is the reality. If you don't do this, and if you don't reduce your price for artists, then it will have a knock-on effect and we won't be able to do these events, and thereby your visitors will not come. So that is what we're currently doing. And again, it's a bit of a battle because we hear, again, as a public authority, we're hearing from the hotels, we pay our rates and, all the costs have gone up, but you're going, look at the knock-on effect that will have if we don't get those artists into the city at that time.
So in regard to the cost of living crisis that we're in, it's that joined up making a deal together.
Together.
It's that collaboration with other sectors that seems to be working in most cases.
Most
cases.
Now,
as many as
she
could
lose artists as well, and we do, you know better than me that sometimes there's certain artists that if they don't get the standard that they want, they'll go to the next place or the next place. So yeah, you do run the risk of losing people, but it's just about the lobby in the background and go. It's for the greater good.
Ross, do you get the prima donnas, or are people really, are they on message and seeing that there's only so much that money to go around at the moment?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, anybody that does know anything about Stendhal's been built on a lot of goodwill and a lot of good faith, and robbing Peter to pay Paul most years, every year, and making agreements. If things go well, if things don't go well, all that stuff. So yeah, there's definitely an understanding with Stendhal and those that are familiar with us. I suppose if we're talking to international artists, they don't, we don't get into that because they don't care. But I think, from the small, medium touring, there's different ends. For me, there is the big stadium, your Live Nation, your bigger promoters, and ticket pricing, and there's only so many entertainment pounds in the market. Right down to your small bands before they can become medium. Certainly in the Northern Irish perspective, there's no ecosystem of a 6-8 date tour. Get that experience to then go down south where the music scene is 5 or 10 times better supported as far as Indigenous artists go, and people spend in pounds. So there's different ends of it, and the smaller venues are all obviously, well, not all, but a lot of them are closing now. So that's just going to make that worse.
From your experience, have promoters helped? If promoters coming collaboratively with you to try and be sustainable, reduce the costs? Are they a blockage, the promoters, or could you work with them as well?
To a certain degree, yeah. The promoters will work with us, and we do have a number of regular promoters who work with us sort of consistently. But I suppose it's more the booker and the artist and their management that are the bigger challenge, I would say, because that relationship is such a staged relationship. By the time they get, as you'll know, by the time you get to the actual venue, you've gone through an artist, their management, potentially an agent, maybe a booker, and then a promoter, a local. You might have gone through Live Nation as well. So it's just that journey of that relationship, and how do you influence such a large group of people?
Do you take on board about the hoteliers? Would that help you in
yeah.
any way? Good. Anybody else on the floor?
I might have another crack at that one.
Oh, yes, Megan, go ahead, yeah.
Just kind of going back to that sphere of influence. So what can we control? In our core team, we can control our own policies. We can control and make changes for ourselves and with our own kind of very close network. And then our artists and our suppliers, they're a little bit outside of that first sphere of influence. So we can chat to them. But at no point is there is very little point in a festival organizer or an event organizer on an island at the edge of a continent apologizing for being a festival organizer or an event organizer. The very nature of where we are and what we do means that we do have to have international travel coming here in order to continue to promote our events. I think that's what we're saying. So what can we do? What are the very first next best steps that we can take? And I'll point back to the example I gave you of the Naturally Wild festivals. This was a cohort of 9 festivals trying to really understand their carbon footprints, working with a myriad of different stakeholders. And the end result of that project is that they're going to have an understanding of their carbon footprint, and then they're going to multiply that figure by, and it sounds like carbon offsetting, and I'm going to say it, and it's a big, carbon offsetting, what a terrible thing. But the truth of it is that they're going to use that carbon footprint and multiply it by whatever the current carbon tax is in the Government of Ireland's publications, which I think is about €48 per tonne. So if they've got 100 tonnes of carbon impact from their festival and they've got €48, you're talking about €480, or is it 4,800? 4,800, thank you. My maths are obviously terrible. I shouldn't be doing carbon footprints at all. But using that figure to then contribute to Loch Rainey, which is a nature reserve down in Kerry. Now, it's not actually carbon offsetting because you're not buying credits in order to cover what you're doing. You're getting to an understanding. You're mitigating everything that you can. Aviation is the hardest thing to mitigate in terms of carbon emissions, but you've done all the rest. And then you're being accountable and reporting on what you can't change, and then using that as a facility to invest into, it's called insetting, investing into nature regeneration on the island. So those are the next best steps that those festivals can take. So I really do get it. This conversation comes up constantly. In Ireland, we do have this problem around transport and around aviation because we are an island. But let's do what we can do and then try and start making other changes, I guess.
Unless I have another question, I'm going to leave it there. No, nothing at the moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel for sharing their thoughts and their insights.